Hi there, Isha here, and welcome to The Higher Life. In this episode, I'm going to explore what I perceive to be probably the most powerful tool or inner resourcefulness that we can cultivate to really ensure that our mind is able to support our personal transformation or personal empowerment. And of course, the work here at The Higher Life is really about bringing forth an education that can really help you align with a larger evolution that's occurring in humanity. And in this process of aligning, you'll come to really understand how to use your energy correctly. And when we use our energy correctly and we have context for our personal lives, that is, our personal life makes sense in the larger collective story of humanity, you start to really feel this deep sense of contentment and rightness of mind and not rightness of opinion, which is where, humanity often goes in terms of its public discourse or the way that we, view our lives. We're very concerned with what's right and wrong, and it really kind of comes back into an opinion or a perception of the world that is very shallow. Here at The Higher Life, we're really talking about personal empowerment through a process of transformational spirituality. And in this context, your spirit or your energy, your wisdom, your capacity to really extract meaning from your life has a purpose, and that is to serve in a larger evolution. And we need a tool for this that is called discernment. And I talk about discernment a lot. And I guess as a life coach, that's where I started out in this on this journey. I mean, I've been interested in the esoteric and the spiritual nature of our existence since very early on. I mean, when I look back at my writing way before I became a coach, this was a preoccupation of mine. I always had a feeling that if we had a context for our experience, we'd be able to feel more strengthened, I guess, and have more fuel for the natural limitations and discomforts and challenges that come our way being a human being on the earth plane. And I've spoken about limitations in a previous lesson, so I'm not going to go into it today. So discernment is it's what I would call useful judgment. Now, as a life coach, I've worked with people for years and years and years, and often they bring to me topics that are going on in their lives that are really about, how do I navigate this situation without being judgmental, that is, without condemning or criticizing or feeling criticized or condemned. And it is a really great question because the mind has this function for judgment, and that means it's useful in our lives. But when we're immature, that is, we have an immature understanding of our own inner resourcefulness, not that we are somehow wrong or stupid or, that word immature, it can be really hard to hear, but in fact, humanity has a lot of immaturity in it. That is, it is unaware of its own power, even though it has an intuition that power is there. So judgment, in a way, the way that we use it out in the world to decide what's right and wrong, who's worthy and unworthy, what we believe or don't believe, what ideology we think is correct or formula or culture, that is kind of an immature use of discernment or judgment. The problem with that level of judgment is it always creates an other, and it enforces then a feeling of separation from this larger story or this larger unfolding. And I will follow on with a video lesson on separation, because separation is a concept that's used a lot in spiritual terms, that we were born into separation, and it's really quite hard to, I think, integrate into daily ordinary life. But what it really means is that we feel separated from, in our individual lives, a larger story or plot that makes sense to us in our individual lives. And what we see in the world right now is kind of two distinctive patterns in humanity. We have this very individualistic pattern and a very collective pattern. And different sections of humanity kind of play out this pattern in their cultures. So some cultures are very collective, very we-focused, and some cultures like my own are very individualistic and personal focused. So I know in my culture, this pursuit for personal lifestyle or personal success is very confusing, because there's something about it that just doesn't sit right. Yes, you can go out and create all this wealth for yourself, or opportunity, or status, or even have a fantastic lifestyle. But when you look out in the world and see that, that's not the common experience for many people, you kind of take a second breath and think, well, there's too much gaps between the haves and the have-nots. Is it really, healthy for me to continue pursuing more of my own personal wealth and success when I'm already pretty okay, and there's a lot of people who are not okay? And that's been a key inquiry for me, working with many people are in the middle class, what I would call modern Western middle class, individualistic culture. That question comes up a lot. What is really the purpose of my life? I've been given all this talent, this energy, this opportunity, but I don't really feel like it's serving something that makes sense. And the work here at The Higher Life is all about, yes, you're right. Follow that intuition. There is a larger story, an evolution that is occurring, and everything that you have within you can serve that evolution. But you need to wake up to it and realign with it. And this activates discernment. Now, discernment is really important because the mind has a tendency towards fantasy. That's what allows us to have these beautiful capacity for inspiration, and therefore innovation and creativity. That idea that we can travel into the unknown and visualize things that are not possible and then make them possible. We call it manifestation. And we've had a really good run with that. Our mind has been very well developed in the art of fantasizing or inspiring or innovating, and we love it. We're a bit addicted to it. But the problem with that is, the further we go along that trajectory, the less aligned we are with the practical nature of life itself. We lose touch with reality. And discernment is our way back into reality. And when I say reality, I don't mean denial. I mean, we come back into understanding the way the universe works and the natural laws of nature, cycles of life, for example, births and deaths, the fact that there is a karmic energy pattern or relationship between the way that we use energy and the way that our environment reflects back to us how that energy is being used. So if we look at the energy, the environment, and we see that what we have is a lot of overpopulation, excessive progress, excessive rubbish, burning down and burning out, a burning up, a heating up, we can see that the environment is reflecting back to us an overuse of that yang mind, that progress mind. And we need to cool down, to reduce, to, in a way, there's a word for it, when you kind of remove yourself from a certain activity. And this is exactly what we're being asked to do as a humanity, as a species, and in your individual lives. You're being asked to align back in to the earth realm. Find your feet back on the ground. Find yourself back into the flow of natural life, and to really observe nature and learn from nature about the true way or the true reality. And in my work, I talk a lot about revisiting your past, your childhood, to understand how your family legacy and your cultural conditioning has shaped your mind, or driven your mind, patterned your mind, one could say, to operate in a certain way, in this really yang way. Now, in order to do that, you have to exercise discernment, the capacity to judge a situation in a larger context, with a larger context in mind. So, for example, when you go back and review your childhood, you're not judging your parents as being good or bad, or your culture as being good or bad, or your religion or your ideology or whatever cultural conditioning you were born into. You're understanding the root or the source of that conditioning, how it's occurred over many generations, and how originally, for example, in caveman times or tribal times, those beliefs had a purpose. They served a purpose. They were empowering in one way or another to that group of people at that time. But we outgrow those beliefs. We outgrow those patterns. We hit a ceiling where we realize they no longer serve society, or they were dysfunctional because they came out of a fear of the other and unknown and ignorance. And we have then generational capacity to face those patterns, those dysfunctions, and dissolve them. So we need discernment for that, because if we go into the judgment of good and bad, evil, right, wrong, which we see a lot still in the public, what I call the superficial reality, we're unable to align ourselves back into this larger unfolding. So, for example, you may go back and look at your family and go, okay, my family was very immature. There was a lot of abuse. There was a lot of ignorance. There may have even been some violence. There's all these things. Most people in their family legacy have something like this. So if you consider this in the larger context that humanity is evolving from immaturity and ignorance to maturity and empowerment or enlightenment, then you represent a transformative phase in that evolution. So perhaps you'll review your family past and realize that there were certain needs that weren't met, or your ancestors went through, like mine did potentially, a feeling of victimization in a war. So that victim pattern, that feeling of not belonging, of not being included, of not having access to opportunity would be in my family system. So it's very important when you're reviewing back over your family legacy that discernment, that capacity to identify the immaturity and the dysfunctional pattern without demonizing the people that it was expressed through, gives you a certain wisdom, a certain capacity to be with the dark stuff and to actually learn from it. And as humanity, as a collective, we're in a phase right now. When I say phase, I mean decades, of really looking back and identifying patterns that have been playing out in the present, such as physical, emotional, sexual abuse, things that were considered perfectly normal or perhaps were, denied centuries ago, are now being identified as very harmful. And we want to make changes. We don't want people to suffer from that kind of relational trauma. So we're really looking at, okay, what happens in relationships? What happens in power imbalances? What happens when we look outside ourselves and are reliant on an authority for our sense of self-worth? I mean, we saw that really come through in the Me Too campaign, where we realized that, lots of abuse happens because the way that the culture conditions people, they don't believe that they have a voice, or they have the capacity to say no, or they lose out on opportunities that they think they need. So they compromise their safety, their right to be treated with respect and positive regard, or even their right to own their own bodies. And we may go, this is terrible, how could that happen? But if you look back over the centuries of human evolution, you'll find the answers to that. There was an immaturity and ignorance. We worked in tribes, basically at cavemen. Maybe we were having relationships with our immediate family. Maybe we were having sexual relations a lot younger because of the primitive nature of our mindset back then. But our mind has evolved, and therefore we can and do have the capacity now for discernment. That discernment allows you to look at a ideology, for example, and it's dangerous territory always to talk about religion, but it's really an important one. There's a lot of fantastical stories that have been able to pass themselves off as a certain kind of truth, but there's actually no evidential proof of that. And what do I mean by that? Well, we know that nature operates in cycles because we can witness the changing of seasons. We can observe in nature certain truths, and anything that is true can be observed to some extent. Now, that's a kind of tricky ground, and I don't want to go too far down because it will take me into different territory. There are definitely lots of things going on in what I would call the physical reality. So sometimes we cannot observe with our eyes or touch or sense or relate with our immediate senses to certain things that are going on. But believing in stories about a higher authority that is judging your life, ready to put you into heaven or hell, there is no evidence of that. And any mind that has a certain amount of discernment or logical maturity would question blindly following any kind of ideology that suggests that there is a power that has the authority to condemn you. Really a higher power, or God, as we like to to call it, is really this higher evolutionary storyline or a higher energy pattern that has its own intention. And we are part of that process. We are tools in that evolution. So it's more natural than a lot of the religious and ideological stories that we have been conditioned into. And we know that these stories are not helpful because they create a lot of separation and otherness. Coming back to that concept of separation, where you're no longer aligned with a larger human story and you've become overly attached to your tribal stories. Those stories of the small self, the small tribe, the personal life, the personal agenda, the personal vendetta. Because vendettas absolutely carry through the generations from tribe to tribe. Through tribes we can see vendettas have stayed very alive, and it's time to let those vendettas go and actually to heal through them. Not just to go, okay, I let that go, but to turn towards those vendettas, those injustices of the past, and realize that they were injustices in the past. And the mindset that led up to those injustices are immature mindsets, and that we need to evolve beyond those mindsets using this one superpower, discernment. So discernment in your practical everyday life, what does it mean? It means to step back from any situation in which you feel troubled, triggered, judgmental, criticized. You can use discernment for anything, and to think, okay, what's the larger context here? What else do I need to know and understand about this situation in order to find some clarity, some equilibrium, some balance in my perspective? You'll know that you're not using discernment when you have a very extreme view on things. And extremities usually come out of triggered states or emotional states, or they can create triggered emotional states. So if you have a very extreme mindset, you tend to then have very extreme emotions that go with that. But if you've also been through a lot of wounding, or you've been born into a cultural system or family system that has a lot of inherited wounding, you may find that it's hard for you to practice discernment, physically hard. Your triggered state, you're easily triggered and your emotions can run wild. And finding that middle ground can feel very threatening. Now, I've had this a little bit in my own life when I've recognized that what I want from my partnership, and I talk about this one a lot because I guess it's one that's very personal, but looking at intimate relationships or marriages or my role as a mother, and feeling really disappointed or feeling really unmet in those dynamics because I'm playing into an unmet need from my childhood where I didn't get the emotional nurturance that I needed and nourishment, and perhaps not the spiritual nourishment and nurturance, and on some level not the psychological training that I needed to be able to meet life with a certain amount of resilience. So I had to work it out for myself, and as a child you come up with very childish strategies for that, and people pleasing was a big one for me, being likable. I find loving and being loved quite easy, so I would use that natural skill in an unhealthy way. So therefore having quite a dysfunctional relationship to love, relational love. So, when I'm in my adult relationships, I realize sometimes I feel really, really triggered and I think this person has wronged me. And it takes a lot for me to think, well, I'm an adult now. Have they really wronged me, or have they just not met a need that I think they should? And it just feels so hard to give up that belief that need should be met by this relationship, because I feel like I'm never going to get that need met. And it feels like giving up on my need to be happy and to be loved and to love. But when you're an adult and when you become an empowered adult, the whole growth process is turning around and facing that unmet need and realizing that you're seeking it out in a dysfunctional way through otherness, looking for someone else or a relationship to fulfill something that you really need to resolve on your own. And you need resilience for this, because you need to be able to sit with the uncomfortable feeling state that a triggered self creates energetically and emotionally in your system. You need to calm down the mind activity that it's all about, ready to defend, to strategize, to compensate. It has a whole little toolkit of things that it's going to do to help you get out of this state that you're in. And you want to be able to settle that mind. And discernment is a really great soothing process, because then you step back and you go, okay, this relationship isn't delivering what I thought that it should. I'm feeling very, very sensitive about that. I feel very overwhelmed. I don't really want to give up on that, but maybe I need to consider what the truth is about this relationship. In what ways is it supportive? Because you'll come to a core belief when a relationship has let you down that it's not supportive. This relationship is not good for me. That will be sort of a core belief, or I am in danger here. And sometimes people are physically in danger, or psychologically or emotionally, and that's a different realm. But I'm talking about day-to-day triggers in a relatively healthy, functioning relationship, or even a dysfunctional relationship that doesn't have contempt or abuse in it. So, you're going to step back and go, okay, what are all the ways that this relationship is supportive, and challenge that inner belief that it is not a supportive situation. Now, on a larger scale, there's whole cultures or tribes of people that feel threatened by another tribe of people. And they may have to think, well, how true is that? Is every single person in this tribe a threat to me? Do they really believe what I've been told they believe? Is this really true anymore? What else could be going on? Were my ancestors maybe operating out of a certain level of ignorance that I no longer believe is a necessary view? You really need to dig deep into yourself and get real about reality. And the reality is, a lot of what we believe to be true is fantastical. It's our mind's way of creating a reality in which we can just chug along and not really have to face a lot of the stuff that is underneath the surface of our operating model or our operating patterns, because we operate out of patterns. So we need to review those patterns constantly in order to be able to dissolve or resolve the ones that no longer serve us, and to cultivate and enhance the ones that do. And we have an inner resourcefulness for that. And I've mentioned most of those inner resourcefulnesses in my episodes or today, such as resilience, such as radical compassion, such as discernment, different ways we can use our body, our mind, our spiritual nature, and our energetic nature to really come home into ourselves and no longer live in separation from this larger unfolding evolution. So on a final note, what is this larger unfolding evolution that we're aligning with? And I genuinely believe that what we are moving into is what would be called the compassionate mindset. It's a way of operating in the world that is very spacious, it's very compassionate, and it's very much about slowing down, letting go of progress and creativity for a while, and manifestation, and really grounding back down and returning back to earth and taking care of the earth so that the earth can take good care of us. And that means becoming a unified species and returning back into a oneness that is no longer believing in the separation from others, from this larger storyline, from our own humanity. And that's why we have stories and plays and art and all these beautiful ways that humans remind each other of the shared humanity. And yes, we tell our stories about difference, but difference is diversity. It doesn't necessarily mean victim. We can be diverse in our experiences because it's what creates a rich tapestry. We don't need to side with a particular version of events. We don't have to be good and bad, victim and persecutor. We have all of those possibilities within us as a human being, no matter the color of our skin or our gender or our food tastes or our socio-economic background. We're human, and in the heart of humanity is a heart that has the capacity to love and be loved, a mind that has the capacity to discern and integrate and achieve clarity, and an emotional state that can really support our sensitivity to live as a human being, to be alive, to feel alive, and to be really moved and transformed by our ordinary daily experiences. And I think that's a beautiful way to live. So discernment. Really think about this as a tool that your mind can focus on and cultivate over the next few years, because this is a really beautiful way to use the mind, and it will deactivate the mind's old way of being really progress orientated, really judgy, really discriminating, all these things that perhaps don't really serve in our maturation towards an empowered and enlightened humanity. So until next time, take care and love life. And of course, if you ever want to go further along this path, check out our courses at Higher Life Academy. Until then, take care.